So in Module 12, we're going to look at qualitative data analysis, and I'm going a little bit out of order of the textbook, but hopefully you'll understand why. And I'm trying to make this module a little bit more multimedia focused, and I'm hoping it'll make it a little bit more interesting to watch. Qualitative data analysis focuses on text rather than on numbers. So text can be transcripts of interviews, notes from participants, pictures, or images. So again, back to chapter 11 from the ENS book. Now that I've gone through quantitative data analysis and maybe scared a few people off, qualitative analysis should be a little bit easier, smoother process for a lot of you. So qualitative data analysis, I'm going to go over some of the features of qualitative data analysis, techniques, research in the news, alternative qualitative data analysis, content analysis, some newer computer-assisted qualitative data analysis, and implications for EBPs, ethical considerations, and some conclusions. So some of the features of qualitative data analysis is its progressive focus. So the process by which a qualitative analyst interacts with data and gradually refines the focus. Qualitative data analysis can be an art, reading literally, flexibly, reflectively, interpretively. So depending on the worldview or the aims of the researcher, it's going to impact the way that you're looking at and interpreting the data. And qualitative compared to quantitative data analysis, there's some significant tangible differences that you as a consumer of the research should be aware of. So on to the techniques of qualitative data analysis. Regarding documentation, you take specific measures to list and save various contacts, interviews, written documents, and other records collected during the research. So it's on you to maintain a disciplined transaction schedule. Also, there's conceptualization, categorization. Condensation is the process of identifying and refining important conceptions in iterative sequence. So sometimes a matrix or a well-defined chart can help facilitate the coding of categorization process. And I'm going to show a video of that later on to hopefully help bring it on home. So examination and displaying relationships, center of the analytic process, allowing the researcher to move from simple description of the people, settings, and explanations of why things happen as they did with the people in that setting. So not just the what, but the why. I'm also going to break apart corroboration and legitimization of conclusions and reflection on researchers' role. So again, the 3 C's of documentation is conceptualization, categorization, and condensation. So maintaining a disciplined transaction schedule. So not just a lackadaisical journal, but like really purposeful in what we're doing. So this 3 C's, the process of identifying and refining important conception. You can make that matrix I just mentioned, and I'll show the video in a bit. And examining and displaying relationships is centered to the analytical process. So giving explanations of why things were happening and as they did with those people in that particular setting. So inductive reasoning as opposed to deductive reasoning. So regarding corroboration, individual pieces of information can be assessed by how credible the information was, were the statements made in response to the researcher's question, or were they made spontaneously? How does the presence or absence of the researcher, and then kind of that reactivity Hawthorne effect, influence the actions and statements of group members? So I encourage you to think about your stimulus value, or maybe even the stimulus value of the researcher, because that can influence the way that people both give data and the way that data can be interpreted. So regarding corroboration and legitimization of conclusions, so tactic knowledge, which is largely unarticulated contextual understanding, is often given with nods, silence, kind of like all those nonverbals, nuances that's hard to explicitly identify, but still affect our expectations. So this is kind of like being aware of your stimulus value and how some people are responding to your nonverbals. And so when legitimizing conclusions, there's peer debriefing process, which involves discussion about researchers' perspective, analysis as an opportunity for an objective second part to give feedback of ideas about the research. And as you're corroborating, you might want to go back with members after you've kind of come up with your conclusions and see what their input is on the interview findings and interpretations. Maybe they're different, or maybe they have a different perspective than you might have. And triangulation is the process of coming up with different aspects of research from different perspectives with the idea of multiple sources coming to similar conclusions, which really adds to the legitimacy of the finding. So in reflecting on the researcher's role, given the qualitative methods are driven by more of a specialized method for each case, it's necessary for the researcher to spend ample time reflecting on how he or she has affected the research itself, and there's not the objectivity of quantitative research to kind of cling on to when facing critique. So I'm just going to take a step back here from death by PowerPoint for qualitative data analysis and do a less linear approach to qualitative data analysis, and hopefully you find this a little bit more interesting. Okay, so how would we go about authenticating our results? How would we figure out how credible the informant was? Things to think about: were statements made in response to the researcher's question, or were they spontaneous? If we're talking about even survey methods or quantitative methods, characteristics of the researcher can really influence the way that people are responding. So in qualitative research, that becomes even more of an issue because now we're really getting to know more in depth about people. And as opposed to filling out a simple survey, we may be asking a little bit more complicated questions. So the researcher's presence, depending if it's covert or overt, may influence the way that people are responding. And so this tactic knowledge really talks about a lot of the rapport that you may build with people. So rapport is also really, really important in qualitative research. So the way that you're interacting with people, the way that you make them feel is ultimately going to influence how reliable they are and how open they are with you. So again, reflexivity kind of builds off of that rapport, and how they feel about the researcher is going to influence the way that they're responding and the way that they're presenting. So it's important to display sensitivity to how the social situations and processes are interpreted from a particular background and not simply just from the situation. Again, unique to qualitative research is trying to understand these processes and not just putting a tape measure to them. Okay, so I'm going to shift gears over to Prezi here. So ethnography is essentially the study of a culture that a group of people share. It's again a focus on rich description. So as opposed to putting a tape measure to it, we're really trying to figure out what it's like for that person within that context. A description is key to the analytic strategy. So as opposed to trying to be reductionist again, we're trying to spread it out as much as possible and get as much information as we can. So this can include pictures, reflections, journals, diaries. So qualitative comparative analysis is a structured method that examines how factors interact to yield certain outcomes. It increases the likelihood of understanding diverse outcomes and increases the ability to identify causal pathways. We're looking into qualitative research. We're trying to get an understanding of how all these variables relate to each other through observations and through talking and understanding. And a narrative analysis focuses on the story itself. Coding is typically of the narratives as a whole as opposed to breaking them down to smaller pieces. And coding in this situation can focus on reading stories and classifying them into general patterns. So again, this takes a while, but something that people get trained on and can be done in a really scientific way. So grounded theory builds on systematic theory that is based on observations. So this is done through open coding and trying to figure out relationships between categories. So as opposed to manipulating them in a lab type setting, we're really just looking at manipulations by observations. This helps us to refine the problem and concepts, and also the indicators that are leading to our dependent variable of interest. Okay, so one thing that I really like is photo voice, and it's a new type of participant action research. It allows participants to record and reflect on their community strengths and concerns. It promotes dialogue and can reach and impact policymakers. So I'm going to show you an example of photo voice, and I think it's better to watch a video as opposed to just me explaining it. So I'm going to post this under the content for this week, and I'd like for you to watch it.
Photo voice is a participatory research method that combines photography and critical discussion with the ultimate goal of engaging the people most affected in issues, and then ultimately using the pictures and the titles and captions that are generated by the participants to inform social action and social change. So it's a process for engaging participants, but also for creating community level change. In this particular project, we collaborated with the Columbia Housing Authority. They're our main partner, And through our connection with the Housing Authority, we're then working with the residents living in public housing here in Columbia, South Carolina.
I took a picture of this mirror, which is a positive message. But when you reach the end of this corner and turn this corner, uncertainty is there. I mean, anything could be right around that corner waiting on you. So you have to be aware of the dangers that we live in. I would love people to, after they've seen the exhibit, to understand the everyday life that we have. You know, things are difficult, but we always go forward in a positive way because we have no other choice. We have to live on.
This picture here represents a time in my life as a young kid. I was being very foolish. And I happened to look up in the State House yard, and there was a Ku Klux Klan rally that was going on during the time. This guy, one of the Grand Masters, came out dressed in his white and trimmed in his red with this snow cone hat on his head. When they saw me back there laughing, they gave chase to me. And then I ran into the fire department. And that's how I managed to escape from being caught by the Ku Klux Klan.
Funding is incredibly important to do community engaged research.
And we wrote 2 different grant proposals to support our work. One was to the Kresge Foundation, an external grant, and then we also wrote an internal grant to the USC Office of the Provost.
That grant allowed us to get started, and it also gave us credibility, I think, to other funders to say, you know, look, you're doing work that your own university thinks is worthwhile.
Majority of us didn't even know each other. Now we've come together, we have different values, but we have the same goals. We have different outlook on things, but we have come together to unite, to make a difference in our community.
The sky's not blue and the field's not green. I'm gonna ask you to look away.
Okay, so how would you do content analysis? So qualitative analysis of text can involve coding and categorization of text, identifying relationships among constructs. Similar to quantitative data, we're trying to figure out how we can put numbers to the things that we've observed to the text, and how could we code those to do some type of mixed method. Some ways that we can do this are through computer programs such as HyperResearch, NVivo, or Deduce. So I'm going to post a video of Deduce, and I think that this does a really good job of showing how mixed methods work. So I'd like for you to check out this video, and I'm going to post some questions to the discussion about this, or you could pose your own questions, really. I think that this video, if you watch at least the first 5 minutes or so, gives you a good overview of mixed methods and how we can mix coding to have qualitative and quantitative benefits. So I'd recommend looking at that. So again, qualitative data analysis can be really valuable in a lot of different ways. It helps you to get a perspective from somebody's actual own experience, as opposed to going in with the preset idea of what you're hoping to research and how you're hoping to quantify it. It can be a little bit more tricky, but there's also a lot of benefits to it, and some newer research is using qualitative and quantitative together through mixed methods. So that really gets the best of both worlds. So some different methods here are ethnomethodology, which is a way in which participants construct the social world they live in, and conversation analysis, which is a qualitative method for analyzing the sequential organization and details of a conversation. And narrative analysis allows us to focus on the story itself and seek to preserve the integrity of personal biographies or a series of events that cannot adequately be understood in terms of discrete elements. So when we're looking at grounded theory, we're trying to build up to inductively a systematic theory that is grounded and based on observation. So we have a theory before we're starting to collect information. And observations can be summarized into conceptual categories. And then I'm going to show you a computer way that we do that, which can be tested in research setting with multiple observations. And we can use all this data and do content analysis to determine the units of analysis, selecting sample from a population, design coding procedures, and if you ever get a chance to do qualitative research, you'll find that coding procedures take forever. But there's great ways that we can do it these days to kind of get a little bit of a mixture of quantitative and qualitative research, and really add depth to the studies that we're doing, because there's a lot of really skilled qualitative researchers out there. So computer-assisted programs, as you've seen in Deduce, can really speed up that analysis process of coding, which takes forever and is super cumbersome. So we can certainly use the different types of analyses to inform our evidence-based practice, especially for populations which may be underrepresented in quantitative research design. But some ethical issues to avoid. Again, anytime with qualitative, we have to be worried about privacy, confidentiality, and anonymity, and actually any kind of research, really. Also need to be aware of intervention and advocacy. What are we giving back to that population? Also research integrity and quality. There's so much onus on the authors here to provide as accurate results as possible, or accurate to what actually happened. And as a researcher myself, I found that when I'm writing up my data and my results, I was surprised the first time I published it, nobody actually wanted to look at my raw data. They just kind of trusted me so much. So that puts all the onus back on us to be as ethical as possible and not to misuse the data or trying to push our own agendas here.